Larry, how do you find the way that India is resisting the pressure from the United States? Because as a part of, we know how important India is for Russia
Sure.
in
Well,
BRICS and outside BRICS.
well, the entire premise of the U.S. effort to pressure India was based on a false assumption. It was they assumed that India's economy was so heavily dependent on exports to the United States that, of course, we could use sanctions and further threats of more sanctions as a way to coerce India. I'm continually amazed at the stupidity of these people. I mean, people like Scott Bessent, he should know better. I didn't have to do a massive amount of research to discover that India's exports as a percentage of their GDP to the United States are about 10%. It would cause a little bit of damage, but not the kind of damage that would be caused if they stopped buying inexpensive oil from Russia, oil and gas, for God's sake. I mean, that would have a devastating impact on the Indian economy. The other thing, we're like the Alzheimer's generation, and not just Trump. I mean, Biden, yeah, boy, did he have it. Obama, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, they have no sense of history and the relationships between India and Russia, which go back into the days of the Soviet Union. And in fact, within the whole context of the Cold War, it was Pakistan that was serving as a base for CIA operations into the Soviet Union. Well, the Russians haven't forgotten that, and it was India who was seen as a counterbalance to Pakistan back then. But the Russians and the Indians have always had very, very good, warm relations. And I'm just sort of amused watching some of the news coverage, like, oh God, Modi welcomed Putin. Yeah, that's like, yeah, let's applaud the fact that a dog meets another dog and sniffs his rear end. Okay, that's what dogs do. This is what India and Russia do. They're friends, for God's sake. So deal with it. The thing that's really sort of thrown a monkey wrench into this, from the U.S. standpoint, the U.S. goal was always to destroy Russia and then go after China. Well, now Russia is playing the mediator, a mediator role between China and India, and the foundations of that conflict are actually starting to crack and erode. And with Modi and Xi dealing with each other. So, Russia's playing a significant role in the creation of this new world economic order. And if anything else, this was Modi given the middle finger to Donald Trump and his attempts to bully him.
Yeah. There's another element to it also, Neiman, a strategic element of primary importance, I think. The administrations I've served, all the way from H.W. Bush, have been trying very arduously to create a new nuclear relationship with India. One that the Congress wouldn't rip our rear ends off for doing, because some of them anyway, because it had implications for helping their weapons program. And I've been involved in that diplomacy. It was very fine-tuned. It was carefully done. The people who were carrying it out, God save the Queen and King, were diplomats from the State Department, principally, some DOD help. But it was an arduous time trying to get the balance in there to form this new relationship with India that our domestic people would accept and that India would accept, and that wouldn't be a real danger and would be an economic boon. And even, as Larry was insinuating, a strategic boon for the United States to kind of pull India into the nuclear world that we dominated rather than the one others might dominate. We've killed that. We've destroyed it. We've murdered it in its nascent crib, as it were. I mean, it was blooming. It was blossoming. Evan Feigenbaum and Boucher and a couple of other people at State deserve great credit for having painstakingly worked for weeks on end, years on end, to get this accomplished. We've destroyed it. We've utterly destroyed it. I don't think that relationship will ever revive itself, because India, as Larry was insinuating or saying directly, has new vistas now. Vistas that are quite historic and quite old in many respects, if you know the history of Russia, India. But nonetheless, they seem to be closing doors on others now. And what we have done, as Larry also intimated, is force not just Russia and China together, two of the most powerful countries in the world now, but India as well.
Yeah.
Soon to outstrip China in population and producing engineers and others at a rate that's phenomenal. And we're making enemies of them all. This is preposterous.
Yeah. But there is a way to deal with that, Larry, to have a better understanding of what's going on, I think, between Russia and India, or Russia and China. Do you feel that the Trump administration is getting there to understand, there is some sort of limitation on the pressure that you can inflict on these countries? And what would be the outcome for them, for their attitude?
Well, they're starting to understand that they don't have the leverage that they thought they did. In the past, we had this commercial in the United States, 20, 30 years ago. It was about an investment, a company that was trying to get people to, invest their money, buy stocks. It was called E.F. Hutton. And the commercial went, when E.F. Hutton speaks, everybody listens. And you'd have a crowd of people talking, and someone would say, E.F. Hutton, and they'd all stop and look and listen. It was the United States thought it was E.F. Hutton, and it ain't no more. Nobody's really listening to us. And the talks, what took place between Putin and Modi, they were talking political cooperation, economic cooperation, military cooperation. Just this morning, they announced, or morning my time, evening their time, that Russia's going to start producing their fifth generation fighter, Su-57, in India. And India's got the S-400 air defense system. And boy, it sure wants now the S-500. And, Russia hasn't made any immediate commitment on that. And then at the same time, Russia's building, I think it's the largest nuclear power plant in India. And they just brought already two of the reactors online now. So it's already providing power to India. So the U.S. attempt doesn't recognize that the change in the world. We're witnessing the birth of a new world economic order. It's the foundation of it resides with Russia, China, and India. Those three in particular. Brazil to a lesser extent, and South Africa. South Africa is just sort of, they're hanging on for the ride. But the real power lies in Russia, China, and India. India and China in particular, because of the size of their countries, and representing about a total of 3 billion people within the world economy. So the United States is unprepared for this, and it still thinks that it can compel people to do its will. But what we've learned over the last 3 or 4 days, the number of these countries, particularly China, they're no longer buying U.S. Treasury bills. And Scott Bessent had to come out, and the U.S. government had to buy its own Treasury bills. So the United States now economically is finding it increasingly difficult to get the world community to support our drug habit. I'll call it a drug habit. As long as they kept buying our dollars, man, we could spend, because we didn't have to worry about paying it back. Now we have to worry about paying it back, and these other countries are increasingly dealing with each other economically in terms of their own currencies. So this meeting today in India, it was symbolic of the weakness of the United States in an arena where it used to be powerful.
Larry and I have coordinated ahead of time. Apparently, it must be our birthdays. That nuclear power plant that Larry just mentioned Russia's going to build was a major objective of our strategy. Westinghouse, Hitachi, Mitsubishi, lots of companies, Allied and American, were looking at that, and subsequent ones. I suspect they're all gone now.
Carl, we talk about India, Russia, and China and other countries. You see their national interest is the hardcore of what they're seeking for. But do you see that happening in the United States, or some sort of ideology is running in the United States, the whole foreign policy of the United States? Carl.
You asking me? Oh, what? Tell me the ideology other than money. What is the ideology that's driving the policy of the United States?
Sometimes the money doesn't, overlap the national interest of what you're doing.
Well, I don't see it overlapping in any significant way, except for the benefit of the Trump clan and the Trump family. That's what I see. I see they're a pack of grifters. And that's why they've just turned their back completely on Zelensky, as far as I'm concerned. That's the way these grifters operate. That's the way real estate agents operate. That property is no longer valuable. I don't need it. Get out of here. I don't want to talk about it. But when you talk about policy, the policy is, if it exists at all, is out of the royal man's mouth on a daily basis. And when you have nothing but sycophants, or would-be sycophants, in some cases, they don't know when to shut up, in other words, and they're not very smart, executing as a cabinet and as principal members of your National Security Council, that kind of policy, it looks kind of strange. And what Larry just said about the Secretary of the Treasury is absolutely right. Yesterday, it was leaked that he even mentioned in a meeting, and I have no doubt that this is accurate, we are going to have payments on our debt of $3 trillion within the next decade. We can't even begin to deal with that. So what do? Shut down? What is Trump going to do if it happens within his 4 years, maybe even earlier than the third year or the first part of the fourth year? What is this team going to do when we cannot pay the interest payments on our debt, period? We're going to shut down in many respects. It's going to be extremely difficult on the average American. That's the real pain that's coming. And on those who are in, I would say now, not the lower 50%, but the lower 65%, who are living from paycheck to paycheck, meal to meal, apartment to apartment, and wondering where the future's going for them. If Bessent's right, and I think he is, that we're certainly courting $2 trillion. And he was intimating we might be courting $3 trillion. This is disaster.
Larry, you remember one of the reasons that people voted for Donald Trump was that he was talking about, reducing these military bases outside of the United States and bring them back home in order to make the United States stronger, make America first again. Do you think that sort of policy is disappearing from the scene?
Yeah, in fact, my understanding is we're wanting to build between Sweden and Norway more than 10 new bases. So we're like crack addicts or meth addicts, and we can't stop. We can't help ourselves. Yeah, we know we ought to stop. Our teeth are rotting. Where we look 20 years older than we really are. But by God, we got to keep spending that money on military affairs and intervening in the affairs of other countries. We just can't help ourselves. So it is, Trump has betrayed his base on that, and they're turning against him.
Look at the deal we just apparently worked out with South Korea to provide them with the same kind of submarine technology and submarines that we're supposedly going to provide Australia. We can't even build the submarines ourselves. Both programs, attack and ballistic, are well beyond cost and well beyond schedule. By congressional law, they're supposed to be canceled, automatically canceled because of those two factors. They're not going to do that because they're so serious. But does South Korea believe it's ever going to see these? Does Australia believe it's ever going to see these. Now, here's the skinny. We're hoping that the programs will become so behind schedule and so expensive in our own shipyards that they will take over and they will build them, maybe according to our diagrams, blueprints, and so forth, to an extent. We're never, and they think we're never going to surrender the top, most sophisticated nuclear submarine technology to anybody, period. Not even this grifter in the Oval Office today. So what are the South Koreans and the Australians going to get? Air in a bag, probably.
Yeah. Larry, after the talks, 5 hours of negotiations, the last round, if I'm not mistaken, was the 6th round of negotiations between the United States and Russia. And here, what John Bolton is talking about, he believes that Donald Trump is selling out Ukraine, and that wouldn't benefit the United States position. And here is what he said, Larry. What is the strategic national interest of the United States in Ukraine, and how is that going to help the United States if the war continues the way that is, the Europeans together with Ukrainians are fighting?
No, Colonel Wilkerson's wrong. Number one, there are a lot of members of Congress that are counting on those millions of dollars that Zelensky's siphoning off. So come on, they got to have retirement accounts too, So I have never seen so much delusional horse manure in my life. It doesn't matter what the U.S. Congress thinks or does. It doesn't matter what Donald Trump thinks or does. Russia is going to crush Ukraine militarily. The only way they can keep Ukraine intact as a semi-functioning nation is to negotiate right away with Russia and accept Russia's terms. This is not like you want to buy a new car and you've got all the money in the world, and you got a car dealer who's got new cars that he wants to sell. So you both come to the table with advantages and strengths. And so then you can actually negotiate. You can try to get him down in price, and he can try to maybe get you to buy some add-ons. But that's not what's going on between Ukraine and Russia. Russia has total advantage over Ukraine. And that advantage is only going to increase geometrically in the coming months. This war will effectively be over by the end of next year at the latest, perhaps sooner, because the losses that Ukraine is suffering, the advances that Russia is now making on the ground. I pointed out in a piece I put up last night, in just November alone, Russia has taken 701 square kilometers. Let's put that in perspective. Gaza is 350 square kilometers. So Russia has taken an area in 1 month that's twice the size of Gaza. Meanwhile, the Israeli military, supposedly one of the greatest armies in the world, have failed to conquer and defeat Hamas after 25 months in a territory that's half the size of what Russia's taken in just 1 month. And the number of reasons for this, apart from the incompetence of the Israelis. I mean, they're vicious murderers, but as far as being competent military personnel, they're an undisciplined lot. Russia's just the opposite. And the advantages that Russia now has with personnel, their total ground forces have grown. They were about 300,000 in 2022 in February. They're now about 1.5 million. So they now have the manpower, the depth to push offensives on multiple axes of attack. And the West and Ukraine can't do anything to stop it. And so that's, listening to Bolton talk about this, go ahead, pass whatever resolution you want. Sanction Russia some more. How did that work out so far? It strengthened the Russian economy and convinced the Russians, we don't need the United States. And as far as the strategic relationship with Europe, name one thing beyond blue cheese and champagne that Europe is good for. You know, they don't provide critical natural resources to us. I mean, there's not a single thing anymore that the United States needs Europe for. Europe is like that obnoxious freeloading relative that comes to live with you and not pay rent. That's Europe.
Nima, you're a media type, right? You'd admit to that. Ask yourself a question. Why the hell would you have one of the United States' leading neoconservative, self-admitted neoconservative, raunchy neoconservative? Why would you have him on other than to spark the kind of controversy that they were looking to spark? I mean, that's like having Lindsey Graham on. It's like having Marco Rubio on, except Marco Rubio comes with the imprimatur of being Secretary of State. God forbid that she should ever exercise that in a significant way. Why would you have him on? Why would you even listen to him? He is saying what Lindsey Graham and other people like him wish were happening. Now, I think the Republicans in the Congress, reprehensible that some of them are, along with their Democratic colleagues, and chicken shits that they are, par excellence, are nonetheless awakening to the fact that the neoconservatives in particular have really fouled everything up in this country. And there are even some of them who are trying to figure out a way to counter them, people like Bolton and even Rubio. I hope they succeed. I hope they gather some strength and succeed. And there are Democrats who would join them. Not a lot. But there are some people who are showing signs of real legislative life in that moribund body.
Yeah.
And that would be very beneficial for the country if they suddenly did.